Hi, it's Nurse Wendy. Today I want to talk about one of the most important things we're going to do to keep students safe at school. We want to make sure that people who are sick stay home and people who are healthy come to school. School staff have already agreed that they will screen themselves every morning to make sure that if they are sick, they stay home, and if they are well, they come to school. We're going to ask families to do the same thing. So I want to go over what that screening every morning looks like. The first part of the screening is to ask in your family, ask your child, is anyone in our household ill or being tested for COVID, or has anyone in our household been diagnosed with COVID, or has the child or the person coming to school been exposed to someone who has COVID within 14 days? If the answers to any of those is yes, if there has been any exposure, then that person should not come to school. The second part of the screening deals with excludable symptoms, major symptoms. We do that all the time. Students who have vomiting or diarrhea are excluded from school. Students who have undiagnosed rash or fever are excluded from school. That's always been the case. So now in the time of COVID, there are a few more symptoms added to that list. Students with fever, persistent new onset cough, difficulty breathing, shortness of breath, or new onset loss of taste or smell, or any of the other excludable symptoms, vomiting, diarrhea, rash, or sudden behavior change like lethargy. Any of those symptoms, if they're present, would exclude a child from school. If a child has those symptoms, the child should not come to school. The third part of the screening process is a little different. It deals with minor symptoms that we typically don't exclude for. But now the CDC and data tells us that some of those mild symptoms are associated with COVID. So the question is, when do we know when students with mild symptoms should stay out of school? At the Klamath Falls City Schools, here's what we're going to do. If your child has 2 or more mild symptoms, those include nausea, congestion, runny nose, sore throat, headache, or body aches, if they have 2 or more of those, they should stay home, unless there's another diagnosis that explains those symptoms. And I want to explain what I mean. Let's say your student has allergies every October, and every October your student gets red eyes and a runny nose, and when your student wakes up in the morning because of postnasal drip, your student has a sore throat. Well, those are 2 or more symptoms, but they're explained by your student's diagnosis of allergy. So you give your student a typical allergy medication and those symptoms are managed. So that student has 2 or more symptoms with an alternative diagnosis, that student can come to school. Now, if that same student has a headache or a stomach ache or just really feels sick and it's more than the allergies, then the typical rule needs to be, when in doubt, hold your student out and call your medical provider for advice. So if your student has not had contact with anyone with COVID and there's no one at home who's sick, and if your student has no excludable symptoms and less than 2 minor symptoms, the next and final questions you have to ask are, has my student been fever-free for 24 hours without medication? And has my student been free of vomiting or diarrhea for 48 hours? And if the answer is that there has been no fever and there's been no vomiting and diarrhea, then your student can come to school. These screenings are very important if we all do our part, because it will make sure that there's less exposure to virus in our schools. So our staff will continue to screen, and we'll ask you to screen every day, and we'll have less risk of COVID in our schools. I appreciate your help. I know there's pressures of needing to get to work and needing to have kids go to school, but if we all do our part, we're going to all be healthier in the long run. Thank you for your attention to this screening every morning. Take care.